My degree is in environmental health. My specialization is environmental and occupational epidemiology. And so I'm going to talk about some of the issues around around those particular areas of focus. And so I'm right now in the Cancer Prevention Control Program. I also have an appointment at the Doran VA Medical Center. Talk to my students. We're talking, some of the speakers, we're talking about, whose radar screen is this issue on? And a lot of the people, a lot of the young folks these days, it hasn't been a big, strong interest in this. And so hopefully, if people can stick with the research and stick with presenting this information, generating new knowledge, we will get to the bottom of some of these issues. So I'm going to start with a picture of the electromagnetic spectrum. Not going to go through all this in detail. I just want to make a couple of points to you. First of all, look at all the medical and other types of communication devices that we use. The electromagnetic spectrum is used extensively. It provides a tremendous benefit to us. And just as electric power, we're not going to go back to wood-fired stoves. I mean, electricity is here to stay. So at the same time that there are beneficial effects with EMF, there are also potential detrimental effects. Some of them are well known. You don't want to sit in an electric chair. There are some health effects or potential health effects that are not well understood, very controversial. Why are they controversial? And that's where we get mixed up and into some of the real policy debates. One of the reasons is that EMFs are very complex. They're not like chemicals, as Dr. Phillips was alluding to earlier today. With toxic chemicals, you know that the concentration or the dose gives you a heightened effect, more of a toxicological response. With EMF, we don't really understand dose. There are many different properties of EMFs. They have an amplitude, they have a frequency and a wavelength. There's the near field and the far field. And they behave differently if you're very close to the source as opposed to further away. There's modulation. There's information in the modulation that perhaps may be very important for eliciting biological responses. So the interaction of EMFs with matter can a variety of different things can happen. The fields can be reflected, they can be refracted, they can be scattered, they can be transmitted, or they can be absorbed. So absorption of that energy is based on a couple of things. The conductivity, that is how easily electricity can be conducted through the medium. People are very good conductors. And it also depends on the frequency and intensity of the field. The point here is that there's a lot of different moving parts here to try and understand. And this is just a short list. There's also the typical things like the duration of the exposure, how frequent the exposure is. So there's inconsistency out there in some of the studies that have been published to date. There's a huge literature in trying to understand this. People have been trying to understand the biological effects of EMFs for years, decades. Part of the issue is just understanding how all these various components fit together. There's one other thing that I think is kind of important, and that is that we are electromagnetic beings. I mean, we have fields. Every time you have a biochemical reaction, there's an electromagnetic field that's generated. Different tissues have different conductivities. So I think at the same time we're worried about some of the health effects that might be associated with exposure to these external agents, there's also a tremendous potential benefit that we can gain just in basic science, understanding the basic biological processes and how electromagnetic fields fit into that. Dr. Olaf said there's a lot we don't know yet. So the understanding of these fields internally, how they work in biochemical systems, has a vast potential to really improve our understanding of basic biology. So I'm going to give a few slides, background slides. I'm going to go through these kind of briefly. A lot of this has been discussed already today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the epidemiology. I'm going to focus on Lookout Mountain. We're sitting in the shadow, literally, of an array of TV and radio transmitters, a community that has some of the highest RF exposures in the United States. So I'm going to be focusing a lot on the study that we did here. A lot of the community is here today, and I'm going to talk about some of the results that we found with that study. And I'm going to try and tie it back in to some of the broader issues in this area. And so others have already mentioned that the thermal effects, the tissue heating effects of radio frequency fields are the most important, and they're what everybody can agree on. That if you're exposed to enough RF, basically you can cook a living organism much like you would if you put a cup of coffee in a microwave oven. And so this is the frequency band here, 30 to 300 megahertz is the part of the band where maximal absorption occurs. And that's, going back to this previous slide, that just happens to be in this band where radio and TV transmission occurs. So the wavelengths that are associated with this type of transmission allow for maximal absorption of radio frequency fields. That's why the standard, the FCC standard, is lowest in that frequency band. So this has all been worked out as the basis for all these various standards. That curve there is for the FCC, but they're all basically similar. The target tissues that these standards are designed to be protective of include the central nervous system, the eyes, the joints, the reproductive organs, thyroid gland. These are all tissues that are not well perfused by blood, and so they don't dissipate heat very easily. There's also an induced current standard. So if you're exposed to a field, you can get an electrical current through your body. And so this current, the standard of 100 milliamps per foot, that's there's going down each leg, there'd be a current in that frequency band. So it's based on the comparison with endogenous currents in our body. We have currents that are generated within our body, and that's a lot of what's measured in a lot of these medical devices. And so this also kind of speaks to this potential that we don't really understand all the electromagnetic properties of biological living systems. And so the study of the effects of EMF can not only lead to answer some of these questions about the potential health effects, but also lead to a deeper understanding, really, of how biological systems are organized. So here, this slide gives a laundry list, and it's not even comprehensive. These are all biological effects associated with RF exposure that occur, that have been documented that are associated with exposures that are non-thermal. In other words, as Dr. Barnes mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to measure temperature changes in certain systems. But there have been papers on all these various biological effects that occur at RF exposure levels that are below those that would be expected to cause tissue heating. And so these include things like cell proliferation, ion flux across membranes, DNA damage. The picture on the right is an example of what the COMET assay looks like. This DNA damage forms the basis of carcinogenesis. That's why it's been so hugely controversial. If DNA is damaged, it's the first step in the carcinogenesis process.